Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here with us. We're proud to lead the effort we're proud to support the effort of great legislators who are fighting for a reduction and reform of the communication services tax. I'm Brad Swanson, President and CEO of Florida Internet and Television. Some things you might want to know about this tax is it's among the top 10 highest in the nation. It's 2.5 times more expensive than sales tax. It directly impacts low-income families across our state, and if your budget's tight, a reduction in this tax makes even a larger difference to your household. For example, a head of a household can pay this tax in several pricing areas: on their phones, their music subscriptions, on a pay-per-view movie, on their child's phone and tablets, smart home devices, televisions, and streaming services. When this legislation is passed, it will mean every dollar saved goes back into taxpayers' pockets. And this morning, we get to hear from great legislators who advocate for tax reductions like these that will affect folks across our state. And we will be joined by special guest Grover Norquist of Americans for Tax Reform, all who agree that we must cut the tax on tech. I'd like to bring up Representative Jason Fisher, who is the bill sponsor of HB 7001, who has been leading the fight on this tax reform for many years. Representative Fisher, thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you everybody for coming out. Florida's Communication Services Tax, CST, is nearly 20 years old, and it needs to be revised to keep up with the technology to protect consumers and to provide stable and predictable sources of revenue for state and local governments. This is a regressive tax, and it hurts everyday Floridians. It's levied on cell phones, landlines, video services, music streaming, cable and satellite television, and other services. The complexity of Florida's CST rates also hinders business growth and tax compliance. Currently, Florida has 482 local jurisdictions with wildly varying local CST rates, which make it extremely difficult for businesses to comply with and for taxes to be collected effectively. We have bills in both the House and the Senate to reduce the state and local CST rates and over time create only 2 CST rates. So the goal is to go from almost 500 rates around the state. I would like for us to go down to 1. We're getting close to going down to 2. The goal is to make it clear and consistent across the state. Florida consumers pay one of the highest rates for communication services in the nation. One report showed that Florida had the 9th highest communication service tax in the country. What I'd like to announce is my thanks for Speaker Jose Oliva and his leadership, and Chairman Brian Avila for his leadership in including in the House tax package yesterday a $60 million tax cut in Florida's CST rate, which provides much-needed relief for Florida's families. The group before you today is united in reforming this burdensome, regressive tax, and we hope to continue the conversation as we make Florida an even better place for businesses and families. I have several of my colleagues here who will speak in a few minutes, but it is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce you to the next speaker, which is Grover Norquist. At the request of President Ronald Reagan in 1985, he founded a taxpayers advocacy group with the mission to limit the size and cost of government and oppose higher taxes at the federal, state, and local levels and support meaningful tax reform like what we're talking about here today. The Washington Publication and The Hill called him hands down the most powerful tax cut advocate in the nation. Please welcome American for Tax Reform President Grover Norquist.
Good to see you. Thank you. I run Americans for Tax Reform, and we work in all 50 states with state legislators who want to reduce the cost of government and the tax burden on citizens. And usually when I'm in other state capitals, I'm saying, do like Florida, both maintaining some limits on overspending, but also on not having a personal income tax. I can tell you all of the competent governors go, how did they do it? We want to go in that direction. And so there's an effort from North Carolina to Arizona to get towards zero personal income tax and become competitive with states such as Florida, the 9 states that have none. There are, of course, 9 or 10 states that have a particularly high communications tax, and This is where Florida really could do some real help to its competitiveness, to how it taxes its citizens, particularly middle-income citizens. This legislation is an extremely important first start. I think it's possible to go further, but this signals this tax isn't going up, which is what businesses that might come to Florida want to know, that it's not going to get worse because it's going to get better. And in fact, there's an argument for going further on both state and local limitations. But for Florida to say to the technology business sector, to its taxpayers who consume technology in Florida, this is a wonderful, important step forward, and I think it's going to pass. It looks very good. The support it has is very strong, both from members, taxpayers, and industry. And then we can sort of take the little asterisk off of "Be like Florida," except for the communications tax, and just say "Be like Florida." Thanks.
Thank you, Grover. So I'm going to introduce some of my colleagues, and I want to start with some of our partners over in the Senate. So there's a few others that'll speak after my good friend Senator Joe Gruters, but he is chairman of the Republican Party of Florida. He is a leader on tax cuts and tax reform over in the Senate. A good friend of mine, and I'd like to welcome up here to say a few words.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you for Byron, David, and Randy Fine for your guys' leadership. I'd like to thank Senator Hudson for his leadership. He is running the bill on the Senate side. He's pushing strongly for this. I'm glad the House came out in their original tax package with that $60 million cut. I think this tax is outdated. I think it hurts our most vulnerable, our senior citizens, those who are living on fixed incomes. This tax cut is long overdue. I will continue to work with my fellow Senate colleagues, including Senator Hudson and others, to try to make sure that this is included in some capacity on the Senate side. And I think this is the year that we could finally cut this down, and for the greater good of all Floridians, get us in line to where we should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Next up, we have one of my House colleagues. We were elected in the same election cycle. Chairman Randy Fine chairs the Higher Ed Appropriations Committee in the House, and he has also been a champion for not just tax cuts, but tax reform broadly. Randy, would you come up and say a few words? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jason. It's an honor to be here this morning. What I'd like to talk about as it relates to this tax is something that reminds me. I used to teach economics, and this tax has two negative effects. Obviously, when we take money from folks, it has a cost to the economy, and we're going to address that. But at least when you have a tax, you're generating revenue for something. There's a second pernicious effect of this tax that creates no value for anyone. When you have almost 500 rates because of kooky little reasons that local governments do what they do, it creates added complexity that creates no value for anyone. Even if, and I'm not advocating this, even if all we did was create a revenue neutral CST tax with a single rate, just the reduced complexity on our businesses who have to deal with this would lead to the kind of economic growth that we are looking for. Florida remains the best place to start, build, and grow a business because we understand what we need to do to help businesses grow and succeed. So both in lowering the tax rate, but also simplifying it for those companies who have to deal with it, I think will continue to move the state in the right direction. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman Fine. Next up from the House, I'd like to introduce you to another good friend and colleague of mine, Chairman Donalds, who chairs the Insurance and Banking Committee. Representative Donalds, will you come up and say a few words?
Thank you so much, Jason. I do have to thank my colleague, Representative Fine, for stepping all over my remarks. He's highly intelligent, as we all know. Listen, there are two certainties in life. We all know this. They're death and taxes. And with the tax portion of a certainty, we have one goal here in Florida, and that's to make sure that our tax system is simplified, plain, and clear for all Floridians, and also that it is not pervasive and pernicious to stop the growth of Florida. So this measure here on a communication services tax is something that is long overdue, something we should have done a long time ago, and I'm just happy to stand here with my colleagues to advocate for it, and we can finally get this done this year. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Donalds. The next speaker up we have today is another good friend of mine, Chairman David Santiago. He chairs the gaming committee. As you can see, he'll be the last elected official to speak here today on this. But as you can see, there's been broad support by a variety of different interests on this. And so what I want to do is introduce Chairman Santiago to come up and say a few words.
Thank you.
Well, these actually mics are not set up for me, but I'll stand to the side. But I just want to say 60 million is only the beginning. As people are still trying to reach and catch up with the digital age, this tax makes it less affordable for folks to get into this digital age and have access to all these technologies. So it's important that us continue to fight. I remember 8 years ago when I was on the Ways and Means Committee, if my recollection is right, I was the first one advocating there very vocally that we needed to eliminate the tax and make it very simple, a sales tax like any other products or goods that our state or vendors provide. I'm happy to see that the warriors have multiplied since then. So I applaud my colleague, Jason Fisher, for running the bill. This is a fight that we need to continue to multiply for more folks to advocate for and eliminate this tax. Thank you, Jason.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Brad Swanson here in a second to start introducing some of the private sector folks that we have. There are a lot of people who weren't able to make it today on the elected side who have been leaders in this area, and I definitely want to thank them. Senator Hudson, as was mentioned earlier, and several of the other senators, other House members, as I mentioned earlier, Speaker Jose Oliva and Chairman Brian Avila for their leadership in making sure that we saw movement here in the tax package and our proposal there. So I want to make sure that I cover all of those folks. But here, let me turn it over to Brad Swanson, who will start introducing us to some of the private sector supporters.
First, I'd like to bring up Speaker Tom Feeney, President and CEO of Associated Industries. They're known as the voice of Florida's businesses, and they were created to foster a great economic climate across Florida. Speaker Feeney.
Well, thanks, Brad. It's great to see my old friend Grover Norquist. We always give him an excuse to get out of Washington this time of year and enjoy, hopefully, some sunshine later today. I want to thank the representatives Fisher, Fine, Santiago, and Donald, and our senators here today, Senator Gruters and Senator Hudson, who is sponsoring the bill in the Senate. Virtually every citizen of Florida pays or is impacted by the communications tax. As we move not only the business community but our young workforce and our students into a knowledge and communications economy, taxing knowledge or communications is a fool's way to go. Every business in the state has to either pass on the high burden of communications services taxes in Florida to their consumers, less wages or less profit. And whether you're a small business or a huge business, this tax cut will move us in the right direction to put us on a more competitive playing field nationally. I think,
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Next up, I'd like to bring up David Hart, Executive Vice President of the Florida Chamber of Commerce. The Florida Chamber is known for its fight to make Florida the most competitive state in the nation. With that, I'll bring up David Hart. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. I'm David Hart with the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Florida consistently ranks as having one of the best tax climates in the entire country for both businesses and individuals. Keeping taxes low, in fact, is in our state's DNA. It is also a contributing factor, that good tax climate. It's a contributing factor to why we are welcoming $1.19 million of capital inflow to this state every hour, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, as businesses and people and their capital flee high state tax environments and come to the Sunshine State. But let me just say that remaining competitive in a global economy means we must have a fierce, dedicated effort to continuous improvement. And reducing the communication services tax provides us with one such opportunity. This is a tax that touches nearly every Floridian, both families and job creators. And if we lower the tax, it will be money directly back into the pockets of families that can use it to boost our economy and create more jobs and make our state even more competitive. The Florida Chamber thanks all our legislative supporters for this, but especially Representative Fisher and Senator Hudson. It's time to cut the tax on tech. Thank you.
With that, I'd like to welcome to the podium Curt Winner with Florida Tax Watch. Tax Watch is one of the most amazing watchdogs in the nation for keeping an eye on Florida's resources. Curt, you want to come up?
Thank you. I'm Curt Winner, Vice President of Research at Florida Tax Watch. Since the communication services tax was enacted back in 2001, Florida Tax Watch has done a lot of research and issued several reports on it. We've determined that the legislature would be hard-pressed to find a better candidate to reduce, both from a tax policy perspective, because with the rate that can exceed 15% in some places, makes it punitive, regressive, distortionary. But probably the best reason to give tax relief is, besides the sales tax, there's probably no tax that could be cut that would affect more people. Just about everybody pays it somewhere, and most people pay it multiple times. So we think it's long overdue, and we thank the legislative leaders for taking care of this. Thank you very much.
Next up, I'd like to bring up Bob LaCour, President and CEO of the James Madison Institute, a known fighter for freedoms in every policy area. Bob?
Thank you, Brad. The mission of the James Madison Institute is to promote economic prosperity and opportunity for all Floridians. And we believe that's best done by limiting the role of government in our daily lives and advancing individual liberty. One of our top priorities this legislative session is to encourage reductions in this onerous communication services tax. In fact, our Technology and Innovation Center, which we recently opened, works to provide meaningful and practical solutions to technology advances currently occurring and those yet to come, even yet to even have been imagined. We're proud to stand here with Grover, our elected officials, all of our friends who are a part of this coalition, to work together in limiting the footprint of government control in our lives, pursuing free markets through competition, and making the Sunshine State a continued beacon of liberty and prosperity for the rest of the country and indeed the rest of the world. Thank you.
Again, thanks to all our speakers, thanks to Representative Fisher and Senator Hudson and the representatives that support this cause in both chambers. Clearly, this is a top priority among local, state, and national leaders and organizations, all who agree we need to cut the tax on tech. So with that, we will open it up to questions from the media. Any questions?
You said that all of this kind of conscience of people. What's to stop the companies from raising their prices after the cut goes through?
Well, it's a competitive market, so folks will be pricing their systems accordingly. But the challenge is this tax is 2.5 times sales tax. When you download a movie, it's 14%. When you go to the movies and you buy a ticket at the theater, it's 7%. It's just an onerous tax, and cutting this is good for Floridians.
So, if they do raise it, though, what exactly? It would go in their pockets, I think, right now.
Well, anytime you can cut a tax and put money back in Floridians' pockets, it's a good thing.
But there's nothing to prevent companies from raising their prices. So,
Well, it's a competitive market. Yeah, the competition of the market is what controls all businesses. Whether you're Sarah's coffee shop and you're charging for a cup of coffee, somebody's going to pay $2.50 for that. But again, it's a market price commodity. Next question.
Disney Plus would not raise its prices then?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Would you say that Disney Plus would not raise its prices then?
I can't comment on market factors. But when you're talking about putting money back in Floridians' pockets, that's the importance of this tax.
Are there businesses that specifically have cited this tax as reasons for not coming to Florida and relocating? Is this just part of the larger landscape of changes y'all want?
It's part of the larger landscape of reducing taxes in Florida.
One thought here. It's big enough to be noticeable in other states, so it jumps out at you as, one of these things is not like the others. Florida does all these things well. Where's this one come from? So it's noticeable. Getting rid of it would be very helpful, and cutting the sales tax does not lead to people raising prices. I've never heard that before as an argument.
Next question.
So I'm kind of, in 2001, this appears to be one of the few taxes that Republicans ever decided to pass. It passed in 2001. What was the motivation at that time?
So at that time, we had local franchises across the state. So you talk about the complexity of this tax. So you had you had businesses trying to deploy technologies in every county and every city, and the local municipalities would charge a local franchising rate. That was a fee to the companies. So in lieu of the fees and that sort of thing, they used this mechanism to the cities and counties wanted to be held harmless, if you will, from a lack, and that's where this came from. So it was a transfer mechanism, if you will, to change how the state regulated its individual monopolies, if you will, at the local and city level to opening up for competition. And as we've seen over the last 20 years, competition has actually driven down what the CST receipts have been, and that's, again, is a testament to Florida's free and open markets in this space. Next question.
You want to go from 500 to 2 taxes. How did it get to 500?
So you've got over 420 municipalities and counties and chartered and unchartered cities. So it was one for each one of those, and then so simplifying it from the complexity of every individual municipality across the state down to 2 rates. That's where that comes from.
Yeah, sure. I know Representative Santiago said this is only the first step, and there is a desire to cut this more broadly. Why not do it now? Because in the tax package, there's all these other grab bags of different tax cuts in there. Why include some of those? Not the chair of Ways and Means, but what's the thinking behind all these other grab bag projects in the tax package now, more broader? This is such the greatest, most impactful tax.
So my focus is on helping people, and that's why I sponsored this bill. If you read through it and you look at who pays it, the tax cut includes everybody who pays the communication service tax. And so I wanted to make sure that we were protecting everyday Floridians. As far as what gets included in the tax package, there is a $60 million CST sales tax that made it in there. But as part of the legislative process, there's multiple pathways to success. And so this bill is one of those, and that's another one of them.
Right.
Any other questions?
Chair of Ways and Means, I just was wondering why not include it, make it larger than sort of edge out some of these other.
Yeah, I think you've heard support about the communication service tax cut from everyone here. And I think all of us will continue to champion a greater number. But the legislative process, there's a lot of different priorities, and we're going to continue to fight to get the biggest sales CST cut that we possibly can, because we want everyday, hardworking Floridians to get a tax cut. Any other questions?
Nope.
All right. Thank you for coming out.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you guys being here this morning.